2021 meeting of the Rhode Island Coastal Resources Management Council. It is 6:10 p.m. And this meeting is being conducted via Zoom format. It's both being recorded and also transcribed by our court reporter. For council members, we have myself, Jennifer Cervenka, Chair, Raymond Koya, Vice Chair,
Present.
Patricia Reynolds,
Present.
Ron Gagnon,
Present.
Joy Montanaro,
Present.
and Don Gomez.
Present.
Okay, we have a quorum. From our staff, we have our Executive Director, Jeffrey Willis,
Present, Madam Chair.
our Deputy Director, Jim Boyd,
Here, Madam Chair.
our Legal Counsel, John Longo,
Yes.
and also, I believe just observing from Mr. DeSisto's office, Stephen Antonucci. You're muted.
Sorry, that is correct, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Say your name again.
Antonucci.
Antonucci. I should know this living in Rhode Island. And we also have Tracy Sylvia, our staff biologist. Ben Getz, our aquaculture coordinator.
Present, Madam Chair.
Where is Timothy? There. Timothy Mott, our staff biologist.
Here.
Our recording secretary, Lisa Turner.
Here, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Our moderator, Ryan Moore.
Here, Madam Chair.
And our court reporter, Cindy Tagney.
Present.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Mr. Moore, who's going to explain for all those participating and observing tonight the rules of the Zoom. Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you all see my computer?
It hasn't started sharing yet, Ryan.
Okay. Let's try that again.
And Mr. Moore, if for some reason you just can't get it to start, if you can, oh, you got it.
Oh. I apologize for that. Welcome to the Coastal Resources Management Council virtual semi-monthly meeting. The date is February 9th, 2021, conducted in accordance with Executive Order 20-46, 107th Supplemental Emergency Declaration, Extension of Executive Orders. If you're having problems with the computer audio, use the phone numbers listed below to enter the meeting. The numbers will also be posted in the Zoom chat box, as well with the meeting ID and password. A note to participants and attendees, please be advised this is an online meeting including all audio, video, and names and comments will be visible in the chat box are being recorded. All members of the public who wish to comment during these proceedings must correctly identify themselves before proceeding. Council members, applicants, and CRMC staff, turn your video on. Do not use your phone and computer audio at the same time. Raise your hand or use the raise hand button to be recognized by the chair. Identify yourself by full name. Use the chat box to communicate any issues with audio or video to the moderator. Members of the public, please keep your video off. Mute your microphone when not speaking. Use the raise hand function to be recognized by the chair. Wait to be recognized by the chair and unmuted by the moderator to speak. Identify yourself by full name. To those on the phone, please press *9 to use the raise hand function. When recognized, identify yourself by full name. Use the chat box to communicate any issues or with audio, video to the moderator. The Q&A feature is also disabled. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. I'll start now with the agenda, the approval of the minutes of January 26, 2021. Those have been circulated. Are there any changes? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Madam Chair, Ray Hoyer moves to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Coy. Is there a second?
Ron Gagnon, second.
Thank you, Mr. Gagnon. I'll now do a roll call of the motion to approve. Ray Coy, Vice Chair.
Ray Hoyer votes aye.
Patricia Reynolds.
Reynolds votes aye.
Ron Gagnon.
Ron Gagnon, aye.
Joy Montanaro.
Joy Montanaro, aye.
Don Gomez.
Don Gomez, aye.
And myself, Jennifer Cervenka, aye. The motion to approve the January 26, 2021 meeting minutes is approved. Moving on to subcommittee reports. I don't think there are any, but Mr. Boyd, do we have any?
No subcommittees reports, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Then moving on to Mr. Willis's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few items, if I may. As you know, that with our staff retirements and filling of those positions, we have been very busy these last several months. And to that end, we have offered a position to an engineering tech here at the agency who has accepted. We just learned today, she accepted today, so we don't have a start date for her, but that's good news for the regulatory side of the agency. As you know, we have had a significant workload with our application, so that will help out tremendously. And as I mentioned at the last meeting, Janet Friedman, our coastal geologist, has retired, so we are awaiting approval to fill that position. No word yet on that approval from administration. And we will be beginning interviews for a coastal policy analyst position that was vacated upon the promotion of Jim to deputy director. The RASO subcommittee, just a quick update, given some technical issues that we had with the post-hearing briefs from the attorneys in that matter, resulted in our ability to not be able to get the subcommittee members those materials and give them adequate time to host the workshop tomorrow. Therefore, we are continuing that subcommittee workshop to a date to be determined within the next couple of weeks. We'll have that date and we will post it and make notice of its availability to everybody. But in the meantime, all those materials have been ironed out and are on the website for anyone to see. The Block Island cable update. I've been bringing this as an update the last several council meetings. As you know, there are two cables, one coming in from the wind farm and one leaving the island to the mainland, both of which had daylighted issues, both of which the council ordered to restore to proper depths. Both cable conduits have been horizontally directionally drilled, and the conduit for those two cables are in place, and the cables themselves will be laid in early March. All the offshore vessel and equipments that are needed to do that horizontal directional drilling have vacated the area, and we are just awaiting the cables to be installed themselves. So that project is still on schedule to be completed later on this spring, late April, early May time. And then lastly, we had brought from the Planning and Procedure Subcommittee the ability to begin rulemaking on offshore wind energy cables into Narragansett Bay. As part of that rulemaking process, and a significant part, is the requirement to meet the Office of Regulatory Reform's procedures for rulemaking, one of which is to do a cost-benefit analysis, which is going to be conducted as we speak and moving forward. But to that end, we decided to move those regulations in another format. And if you don't mind, Madam Chair, I'd like to pass over to Jim to explain exactly what we are doing with those regulations.
Thank you, Mr. Willis. Just briefly, council members, in discussions with the Office of Regulatory Reform, we decided that it would be in the best interest to obtain some additional information to help in development of a cost-benefit analysis by issuing the proposed draft rules as an advance notice of proposed rulemaking. So this is a process that's permissible under the rulemaking process under the APA. And we believe that by issuing the advance notice of proposed rulemaking, it'll provide stakeholders an opportunity within a 30-day comment period to answer some very specific questions that we're laying out in the ANPR, Advance Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. So we do plan on issuing that later this week or very early next week. We'll have the preliminary draft submerged cable regulations in state waters attached to that notice, along with the very specific questions in the notice itself that we are seeking additional information. Once that 30-day comment period ends, we'll pull together all the comments, and we have a colleague from the Office of Energy Resources, another analyst that will be helping us develop the cost-benefit analysis so that we can continue with the rulemaking process. So I'm happy to answer any questions if council members have any questions.
What's that anticipated time frame? So you have the posting, you have the 30-day period during which you can receive comment, you'll digest those comments. You have the Office of Energy Resources person to help develop that analysis. Is that a 2-month, 3-month? What do you think?
It'll likely
I won't hold
be,
you to it.
Yeah, it'll likely be a 2-month process anyway before the cost benefit analysis is really well rounded out and developed from responses to the questions that we're seeking additional information on. So the other advantage by issuing this advance notice of proposed rulemaking, it also puts the wind development industry on notice that we are proposing to move forward with rulemaking to identify cable corridors within state waters. The preliminary draft regulations, as we had explained previously to the Planning and Procedures Subcommittee of the Council, was to apply only within state waters because we cannot specifically regulate or require any specific standards in federal waters for renewable energy cables. That's strictly under the purview of the federal regulatory agency, in this case, BOEM, that is the lead federal agency for the permitting of offshore wind development on the outer continental shelf.
All right, well, good luck with that. And I'm glad you can pull in from another agency to help with that process, which I'm sure is very time consuming.
Yes.
All right, any other questions for either Mr. Willis or Mr. Boyd on anything reported on? Okay, hearing none, thank you both. And we'll move on to, we have 4 applications that have been noticed and are before us for decision tonight.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
can I just preface the first 3 applications with a statement, please? And
Yes, please.
They are for residential dock applications that typically staff handles and brings to what we have compiled here internally is a review team, a management review team, that the program gives us the ability to review and decide on these applications administratively, as long as they meet certain conditions and certain standards of the program. However, these 3 applications have all gone through that vetted process. There are really no staff objections to any of them, as you'll read in the staff reports and staff will report on. However, there are 1 or 2 variance requests that trigger full council review because at the time of the regulations being written, those particular variance requests were felt that we should not handle them administratively. They should be brought in front of the full council for your consideration. So while I'm not minimizing any of the issues brought forth with these docs, I do want to let you know that administratively, we have vetted them, we have reviewed them, we have discussed them, and they are here in front of you for 1 or 2 variance requests that are programmatically required.
Thank you for that preface. That's good to put that in perspective. And I did note from some of the comments that there's some discretion administratively to grant some variance relief as to the length up to 75 feet and such. But then when it goes beyond that, that's more in the purview of the council. So, and I did kind of view them all the same as, you know, having length issues and some more variances than others, but there were some similar patterns.
That's exactly right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And just to clarify, Ms. Sylvia, did you do 2 and Mr. Mott did 1? Okay, and so are you the Whelan application?
Yes.
Okay, and then are you the next one also, Hedison?
Hedison, yes.
Okay, great. So we'll stick with you for a little while and then shift over to Mr. Mott. All right, so Ms. Sylvia, would you go through your staff report for us?
Certainly, Madam Chair. I can make it even briefer now. Thank you to the Executive Director. The Whalen Dock is a typical dock design, pier ramp float, 150 square foot float. It's located in Bristol Harbor on the west side. Relatively open waters, but it is a harbor on Papasquash area. It was sent to notice. It had no comments received, including from the town, and they typically vet their docks through the Harbor Commission. There was discussion at staff level with the engineer on the design to try to balance avoiding impact to the coastal bank vegetation, the buffer, the wetland that it was crossing, how close to the property line extensions, how long it would be, and there's also a rock out there. So the design has changed. The current plans you're looking at shifted it slightly from the original public notice. They're now avoiding the wetland entirely, which staff had advised. There's no submerged aquatic vegetation here. It was eligible for Army Corps review. The real issue it's here is for the length variance. It needs a 54-foot length variance. It achieves about 4 feet of water at the terminus, but it's consistent with the length of other docks along the shoreline. They're pretty spaced out. There really aren't a lot of navigation issues there. So staff recommends approval. The only stipulation that I'd added on this one was that in addition to standard stipulations, this house was also recently approved for construction, and we require a residence for residential boating facility. So if you approve it, I would stipulate that a certificate of occupancy be obtained before they commence any dock construction.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Ms. Sylvia? I just have a question for you on the variance. We have standards that we have to review the request against. So with respect to the 104-foot length of the dock, did you review that request against the 6 variance criteria?
Yes.
Okay. And found that there was, the length was necessitated by the existing conditions?
Yes.
Okay. And I think that I saw at one point that, at least in the applicant's materials, it was to get to a deeper water depth so that it would be consistent with another regulation that requires 18 inches. I'm not sure if I'm getting that correct. And then perhaps in yours, it was to avoid a rock. So I'm assuming it's both.
It is both. It was balancing both. They meet the minimum 18-inch. We strive towards around about a 3 foot or so, maximum end. But this is pretty standard for that shoreline, 4 to 5 feet of water. And it is cited such to avoid that rock, which would be right in the way at 3 foot.
Okay. So this is more the rock then, because you don't have to have up to 4 feet. You can have less than that.
Correct. Then the only other option to avoid that would be to site the structure further north, which would then impact the wetland by crossing it.
Right. Okay, and you found it to be the minimum necessary?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions for Miss Sylvia before I ask the applicant if they would like to make any comments? Okay, hearing none. Mr. Moore, if there is an applicant in the waiting room, could you admit that person?
I do not see the applicant.
Okay, if the applicant is here, a representative of the applicant, you would need to raise your hand, which is a feature that you can find if you click on the participants, and it pulls up all the names, and then if you hover over your name, I think that's how you achieve it. You can raise your hand. All right, I see someone coming in.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
I can hear you. I can't see you.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm Ron Blanchard, the engineer, the applicant. The applicant should be here at this point. He did say he was running late, but I don't know if I can answer any questions. He is on his way if he's not in attendance yet, so.
Okay, yeah, I can see you now, and I don't have any questions. Do other council members have questions for Mr. Blanchard? Okay, I don't think we have any questions for you. Do you?
Good.
Does your applicant want to say anything? Are you aware of your applicant wanting to speak?
I don't think so, not necessarily. My understanding is he's got to be present for this hearing, but I think Tracy explained everything very well. So I don't think there would be anything to add.
Okay. I would ask Mr. Longo, do we need to wait until the applicant is present for the Zoom meeting before we vote on this?
If the engineer says he's authorized to speak for the applicant, and then we do not.
Okay. Are you authorized to speak for the applicant, Mr. Blanchard? Okay.
Yes, I am.
All right. Okay. Is there anyone else who's on this meeting who would like to speak on this application, either for or against? And if you would like to speak, again, you need to raise your hand.
Also, if you're calling in, please use *9 to raise your hand.
Okay.
No hands, Madam Chair.
I don't see any myself. Do you see any, Mr. Moore?
No, I do not.
Okay. All right, then I'm going to, if there's nothing further from you, Mr. Blanchard, I'm going to close the public hearing.
I'm all set. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll entertain a motion on this application.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Gomez.
yes, I've gone through this and there being no objectors, the variance is reasonable. The only question I had on it was really answered by Ms. Sylvia on the why 104 feet, and she answered the rock. So that sounds very reasonable. And so that combined with the staff report, I would move that the application be permitted, be accepted.
Thank you, Mr. Gomez. And that's subject to Ms. Sylvia's stipulation?
Exactly, yes,
Okay.
yes.
All right. Okay, great. And is there a second to Mr. Gomez's motion?
Tricia Reynolds, second.
Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. All right, any further discussion on the motion? Okay, I'm going to do a roll call. Ray Koya, Vice Chair.
Ray Collier votes aye.
Patricia Reynolds.
Reynolds votes aye.
Ron Gagnon.
Ron Gagnon, aye.
Joy Montanaro. Joy Montanaro. I think you're on mute. Okay.
Joy Montanaro, aye.
Okay. Don Gomez
Don Gomez, aye.
and myself, Jennifer Cervenka, aye. The motion to approve with the stipulation referenced by Ms. Sylvia is carried, and the, where is Mr. Blanchard? Mr. Blanchard?
Here, yes.
Yeah, okay. Your application is approved, and you can tell your client that.
Okay, thank you so much.
He's not here. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Moving on to 2020-11-083, Eric Hedison, Revocable Living Trust. This is also an application to construct and maintain a residential boating facility. And Ms. Sylvia, you're up again.
One moment, please. Okay, this dock, similar dock construction, pier ramp float. It's a slightly smaller float, 144 square feet. It is in Point Judith Pond on the west side of Great Island. It came in as a 57-foot length variance. And following close of public notice with no comment, we looked into our review a little bit further. It was 20 feet or so longer than the neighboring structures and didn't feel like it was a minimization. So we asked them to revise it to pull it in line with the neighboring docks. So it's now requesting a 36-foot length variance, total 86 feet seaward of mean low. It gets 2 feet of water, which meets our water depth standard. There's no wetland, no SAV. It does not meet the lateral access goal of 5 feet at mean high water, but it's staff opinion that there isn't any existing lateral access there. There are numerous structures, if you've seen on the photos and the plans currently, and mean high water is at the seawall. So I believe it's a minimization of variance criteria. They've revised it per staff comment. I recommended approval, and I also have an extra stipulation on this one that the outhaul components that exist are removed during dock construction, if approved.
Okay, thank you. And is this the application that the extension in the length is driven by trying to get to deeper water as opposed to a rock?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that whole area is pretty shallow. These are, yes.
Okay, so that's the single basis for this variance, the necessity of this variance. Okay.
Correct.
Any other questions for Ms. Sylvia? Okay, if none, then I would ask the applicant or applicant's representative to join the meeting. If you could raise your hand. Mr. Hedison, and I assume Mr. George?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Madam Chair, I'll swear them in?
Yes, please.
Mr. Henderson and anyone else there is going to be testifying. Could you raise your right hand? And do you swear or affirm the testimony you give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth? So help you God?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. You can put your hands down and proceed.
Okay, gentlemen, you heard the staff report. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
My name is George. I'm the engineer of record, and
I'm sorry, it's hard. It's difficult to hear you.
Can I get your name again?
my name is George.
Mr. George, you're going to have to speak. There's something on your volume that's not right.
Okay, hold on a second.
Okay, just speak louder.
Is that any better?
Yes.
Okay. I can't add much to what Tracy said. We did do the SAV study, and there was no vegetation at the request. It meets all the sideline setbacks, and the dock is was made shorter based on staff request to draw a line from abutting docks and not to exceed that line with this dock. And we still have 18 inches to 2 feet at that length of 88 feet from mean low water. So there's really, Jeff Balsh is also here. He did the surveying. And Eric Hedison is here if you have any questions of him.
Can I just get your full name again? I only heard George.
R-N-E-S-T, Ernest.
Did you get that, Cindy? Ernest George? Okay. And do you agree to the stipulation proposed by Ms. Sylvia to remove the outhaul structures during construction?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any questions from other council members for this applicant or his engineer? Okay, hearing none. And if you don't have anything further, I'm just going to ask if there's anyone who would like to comment on this application who's attending. If anyone is interested in commenting on this application, either for or against, please raise your hand and you'll be admitted. Mr. Moore, I don't
Seeing none,
see
Madam
anyone,
Chair.
do you?
No, I do not.
Okay, all right. Anything more from you, Mr. George or Mr. Hedison, before we close the public hearing?
I have no question.
Okay.
I have no question.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to close the public hearing and I'll entertain a motion.
Madam Chair, Ron Gagnon, I will move to approve the application with the stipulation to remove the alcohol and other standard stipulations.
Thank you, Mr. Gagnon. Is there a second to Mr. Gagnon's motion?
Don Gomez, second.
Thank you, Mr. Gomez. Any further discussion? All right, I'll do a roll call. Vice Chair Ray Koya,
Ray Koya votes aye.
Patricia Reynolds,
Reynolds votes aye.
Ron Gagnon,
Ron Gagnon, aye.
Joy Montanaro,
Joy Montanaro votes aye.
Don Gomez,
Don Gomez, aye.
and myself, Jennifer Cervenka, aye. The motion carries and the application is approved. Thank you, Mr. George and Mr. Hedison.
Thank you.
Moving on to our last doc application in the series, which is 2020-05-059, Gordon and Sharon Fletcher. And I believe we have Mr. Mott, who is our staff, who's going to be giving the report on this.
Yes, once again, good evening, everyone. This is a dock for Sharon and Gordon Fletcher in the Shore Acres neighborhood of North Kingstown. It's a dock proposed inside Wickford Harbor in a backwater area known as Fishing Cove. The constraints in that area are shallow water, and it's not really an area that lends itself to a lot of navigation. There is a mooring area adjacent to the proposed facility. As the length is greater than 75 feet because it's a constrained area, it has to be seen by the council. The executive director cannot approve the dock administratively. If this was out in the bay, he could go up to 200 feet and approve a dock, but as it's a more constrained, restricted area, the numbers put it 75 feet. They are proposing to go 86 feet, which is just slightly over the 75-foot length approvable by the director. But the point that we've been working on over a period of time is trying to come up with a facility in this shallower water area. And they've done some things like spanning a 30-foot pier over fringe marsh to avoid placing piles in the wetland. That was one of the things that we wanted. And they've agreed to chalk the float so that it can't ride on the bottom during lower water events. They're chalking at 1 feet. I'd like to see it go to 18 inches. But basically, it's a type 2 water body. They've done what they can do. So they're asking for a 36-foot length variance to 86 feet over the 50 feet. And they need a 1-inch depth variance because they're only gaining 17 inches of water and not the required 18 inches. They're only 3 feet off the mooring area, but they are trying to take advantage of wharfing out their right to wharf out off their property. They are in line with their property. So they have 3 feet of clearance. The town has said that they have no objection to it, and they've written a letter that we have in here for approval of the facility. Army Corps has also just approved the facility, and we see no navigational impacts from a proposed facility, and staff has issued no objection to the facility.
Did I see in some portion of the application that there was the property line setback? There was a variance at one point.
There's
that
not a
was needed?
required variance because they have a letter of no objection from their neighbor. And so
Okay.
once that happens, it's as if there's no variance. And basically all the neighbors were pleased with that location because the other issue where all the neighboring docks are the same length and this dock sits in the middle, and this gave the most scope and distance between the facilities. So the neighbors were pleased with the location.
Okay. Will you please explain to me this wharfing out concept? I don't know what that means. When you just explained it, it still didn't, dawn on me.
We always have an issue when we look at mooring areas for towns, and it's a balancing act on where we place residential boating facilities. But generally, if mooring areas are close to the shoreline and there's a property owner that's property lines run out to that mooring field, they usually would have the closest mooring in that field to their house. And we look at that as they have a right to access. If they're going to put a pier there and they qualify all other ways around for doing a residential boating facility, we then give some latitude for that, as do the towns. So the towns run the same thing. Generally, if somebody meets all the requirements for having a residential boating facility and there just happens to be a mooring field there, then most likely they would have the closest mooring anyway. But we kind of look at that, and so does the town. And in some cases, it's a big question of whether or not that's a variance or not. But we kind of consider their right for wharfing out.
Okay. And so we have the town approval of that. And then we have the 2 abutters with letters of no objection.
The one abutter that is the closest one, if they're within 25 feet, instead of applying for a variance, if they have a signature from that neighbor, then they do not have to, it's not a variance. So they wouldn't have one from the other neighbor.
And what's the purpose of the chalking that you?
Chalking
18
is
inches?
because what we're doing is we're balancing length of the facility, we're trying to not get an excessive length and also give them enough water to get a small boat in there. We're running into shallower water. And so when that happens, we like to have the floats not in lower water events, below mean low water, mean low water, and even more extreme events. There's turbidity created as the float rides close to the bottom, and it pulsates in the tide and little wavelets, and it creates a lot of scouring effect, and because it's so close to the bottom, and that causes turbidity and sedimentation into water. So we try and avoid that. So it's a pretty standard thing on shallower docks to chalk them.
Okay. And you've reviewed the variance requested against the variance criteria under the Red Book?
I have.
And you found that they meet each of the criteria?
Yeah, like we said, this is about as closely balanced a combination of all the different factors as we could get.
Okay, great. Any other questions for Mr. Mott? If none, then is that all, Mr. Mott?
Yeah, that's it.
And you have the one stipulation that you would like on the chalking?
For 18 inches of chalking as opposed to
Okay.
1 foot of chalking.
Okay. So at this point, I would invite the applicant or applicant's representative to join the meeting. You can raise your hand and be admitted. Okay.
Hi, this is Gordon Fletcher.
Okay. Hi, Mr. Fletcher. So I think I have two screens for you, but one is your phone and one is your computer. Is that correct?
That is correct. I had to join while I was in my car, and because of the traffic, so I just did what I could, and I found that I could get online as well. And I noticed that Warren Hall, our engineer, is here too.
Yes, I see him. Okay. Mr. Hall, do you want to turn on your video?
I believe I'm on now, Madam Chair.
Yep, I see you and can hear you. All right, you heard the staff report. Is there anything more that you would like to add? And Mr. Longo, I don't know if we need to swear anyone in, but I'll allow you to do that.
Mr. Hall and the applicant, why don't you both raise your right hands and I'll swear you both in.
And my hand's raised.
Mr. Hall seems to be frozen.
Yep.
Mr. Hall? Well, Mr. Applicant, I'll swear you in while we wait for Mr. Hall. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you'll give tonight will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
And what is your name for the record, please?
It's Gordon Fletcher.
Okay. Mr. Hall is still frozen.
All right, well, let's proceed without him. Unless Mr. Fletcher, you want him to speak. But I'll just ask you, is there anything that you wanted to add to what was just presented in Mr. Mott's staff report?
No, I think he explained it very well, and appreciate the effort that's been put into this.
Okay, and do you agree with the stipulation that Mr. Mott would like to have on the depth for the chalking, I guess the 18 inches?
Yes, I do.
You agree with that? Okay.
Yes, I do.
Okay, great. Are there any questions that council members have for Mr. Fletcher? Okay, if none, and Mr. Fletcher, you don't want to add anything more, I'm just going to ask if there's anyone from the public that would like to speak on this application, either for or against. And if you do, then you need to raise your hand and you'll be admitted. Mr. Moore, I don't see anyone.
Or do I?
Okay. All right, Mr. Fletcher, anything more before I close the public hearing?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right, I'm going to close the public hearing, and would someone on the council like to make a motion on this application?
Madam Chair, Ray Coy to be recognized.
Mr. Koya,
Thank you. Based upon my review of the application and the contents contained therein, and the presentation and the comments and report by our staff biologist, Tim Mott, I would make a motion to approve the application with the stipulation as recommended by Mr. Mott.
Thank you, Mr. Koya. Is there a second?
Juan Gomez,
Patricia
second.
Reynolds.
Pick one.
Okay. I'll pick Patricia Reynolds because Don, you're always up there. All right,
No.
thank you. Any further discussion on the pending motion? All right, I'm going to do a roll call. Vice Chair Ray Koya,
Ray Koya votes aye.
Patricia Reynolds,
Patricia Reynolds votes aye.
Ron Gagnon,
Ron Gagnon, aye.
Joy Montanaro,
Joy Montanaro votes aye.
Don Gomez,
Juan Gomez, aye.
and myself, Jennifer Cervenka, aye. The motion carries and the application of Gordon and Sharon Fletcher is approved. Thank you, Mr. Fletcher.
Thank you very much.
All right, now to our last application, which is not a residential dock. This is for a new aquaculture site, Walrus and Carpenter Oysters LLC, 2019-12-055. And I believe Mr. Getz, you will be presenting the staff report.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Shall I proceed?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay. Yeah, so this is an application for a 7.8 acre farm to grow oysters and kelp. This is in the vicinity of Dutch Island Harbor in Jamestown. And this is an application for floating gear. So the proposal is for 2,000 individual floating cages. And that's of the typical high profile variety known as oyster grow or flow and grow cages. It's interesting to note about this application is its travel in history before the council tonight. It began really somewhere in summer of 2018. CRMC was alerted to the original site of the applicant, also in Dutch Island Harbor, is a 2-acre site. And the residents of Westwind Drive alerted us to the fact that there were perhaps more cages there than was allowed by the assent. Investigation and discussion with the applicant did reveal there were 420 cages when the site was approved for 240. An agreement was hammered out between the applicant and CRMC that those excess cages would be removed in a timely manner, but in one that would allow the applicant time to harvest the product out of the cages first. The applicant, abided by the terms of this agreement. It was 10 or 12 cages a month for a period of a couple of years until all the cages were removed and only the 240 remained. During that time, the residents of Westwind Drive who brought this to the CRMC's attention continue to have concerns and discussion with the applicant regarding his original 2-acre site. That is the closest site to the neighborhood of Westwind Drive in the Dutch Island Harbor area. So it therefore has perhaps more of a visual impact. The applicant, interestingly, reached out to USDA and a mediation service that they offer for farmers, albeit traditionally for terrestrial farmers, land farmers, but their services apparently also were useful in this instance. So the applicant and the residents of Westwind Drive, over a series of meetings, came to terms and found an agreement of sorts. And that agreement was that the applicant, Walsh and Carpenter, would move their farm from the original 2-acre site, which is the closest to the West Wind Drive neighborhood, almost a half a mile up the shoreline, away from the neighborhood, and he would apply for a larger lease than the 2 acres. And the residents agreed that they wouldn't object to this new application if the terms of their agreement were abided by, being that he would vacate that 2-acre farm. So that is how this proposal began. During the review of the proposal, we had the standard process. There was a shellfish survey. Did not find a very high density of quahogs at all there. Also, DEM, Fish and Wildlife, they did submit a letter of objection on this proposal due to the overlap of with historic eelgrass habitat. And this is based on a survey that was done back in 2012. Subsequent surveys have been done in this area, but have not found eelgrass in this area. CRMC staff also did a survey of this area as part of this application review process, and did not find any eelgrass there. And that was I believe in the summer of 2019. So there have been a few. There were two objections were received during that review process during the 30-day public notice period. We did receive letters of non-objection from those who were party to the mediation, outlining their what they saw as the pros and cons of the agreement that they had reached. Some of the other objections were focused on the impact to the Great Creek area, which is actually close to the original site, but quite far from this new site. So the impact to that area would be very minimal. Also, impact to the mooring field. The mooring field is again farther away than the original site as well. However, there were some more recent developments on this application, as recent as just a few months ago. I was contacted by the applicant in the fall. He was telling me that he was having discussions with the management at the Watson farm, which is the owner of the property closest to this new application. They had some concerns about a public access point that they maintain on their property, and that the proximity of this new proposal was a little close to that. I actually met with both the Watson Farm management and the applicant at Watson Farm, and also we visited the site on the shore to look at it. The negotiations continued after that meeting between the applicant and Watson's Farm, though to my knowledge there was never really a hard agreement reached. However, the applicant did submit a revision, which was originally based on these discussions with Watson Farm. He submitted a revision where he proposed to modify his northernmost boundary a little further south. So it would essentially be further away from the public access point at Watson's Farm. And then he maintained the same acreage by widening the lease a little bit. And he still proposes the same number of cages for this area. It's 2,000 cages in the same style. Part of the investigation he did researching this new revision led him to a preference for this revision. It has conditions more suitable for the operation he is trying to undertake. And additionally, DEM staff, we reached out to DEM on the revision to see if it would maybe address or lessen some of their concerns regarding the historical eelgrass habitat. And they indicated favorably that it was preferable. they were to submit a written letter, hopefully in time for this meeting. That letter did not reach me in time. However, I believe DM staff is on the line tonight to speak to this aspect of the application. So essentially, the new revision also, I should say, it shows a more organized gear layout, or at least it's kind of organized more in columns with spaces that run lanes, I should say, that are kind of perpendicular to the shoreline, which would aid in anyone traversing in a kayak from the shore or from the shore. I find that both the original application as submitted and this revision both meet the requirements of the Red Book. However, given that the revision seems preferable for a few reasons, one being it lessens the impact or overlap with historic eelgrass, and also is further removed from the access point Watson's Farm, and also that the applicant himself finds it to be more suitable for his needs. So with that, I would stress that any approval of the revision just reference those dated plans, January 13th, 2021, just so that the record is clear. And with that, that's the conclusion.
Complete.
That's the conclusion of my report. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. I just have a question about those revised plans. Does the configuration change the distance between the west wind neighbors and where that lease would be? In other words, I'm just trying to understand if there's any impact on the mediated resolution because of the change.
Yes, excellent question, Madam Chair. The applicant himself wanted to ensure that the residents would be okay with this revision. I actually met on a Zoom call with the applicant and the residents last week in preparation for this meeting and him presenting his revision. It does not move the boundary closest to Westwind Drive any closer to them. So the southern boundary would not be any closer. There would not be any piece of gear that would be closer to them in the revised format. It would, however, be slightly closer to shore. But from the conversation I had with those residents, I don't think they did not seem to that the change was so much that they would now object to it. That was not communicated to me at the time.
Okay. I saw that one of the conditions for the mediated resolution that there was a time period put on the relinquishment of the existing lease site. And I saw 2 years. Is that correct?
Yes, so that is correct, Madam Chair. In the original proposal and the revised proposal, the applicant has the timeline of 2 years to remove or to vacate that site. That was apparently something that was in the that the residents reviewed in this mediation. However, I would say that the timeline for removal should be a reasonable time frame. 2 years is quite a bit of time. I would recommend that maybe through the end of the year or a year might be also a reasonable timeline to remove that gear.
Okay, maybe we can talk to the applicant about what's required to remove that and start his new area. It did seem like a long time period to me, but I don't exactly know what is entailed.
It is an undertaking. The anchors and the like would all have to be set before the gear could be attached to them and reset at that area. But the applicant is here tonight and he is willing to speak on this.
Okay. There was another condition, I think, that the DEM wanted to place relating to waterfowl, deterring waterfowl. Can you speak?
Yes, yes. So that is a standard request from DM that non-mechanical bird deterrents be used. That is from that is the request we get from Division of Fish and Wildlife. Now, coincidentally, or from other divisions within DEM, we often get the request that the applicant should have some form of bird deterrent on these structures themselves. So it can be a bit of a conflicting message, but I believe there are non-mechanical bird deterrents that would work, that DEM would not have an issue with, and most floating aquaculture has a similar stipulation for non-mechanical bird deterrents.
And some of them are more visually impactful than others?
Yes, so for instance, there is a one device that is used in other states and regions that, with floating gear. It's a kite, essentially. It's like imagine like a fishing pole floating upright in the water with a string and something that looks like a hawk on it, but it's a kite. And that kind of just, spins around. And if you move that every couple weeks, it can, so the birds don't get used to it. It is effective at deterring waterfowl. However, I understand that the Department of Fish and Wildlife does not endorse such types of deterrents. The most common way of deterring waterfowl is to use some kind of something on the float itself, like a zip tie, say, a long zip tie with the tail. Instead of nipping it off, you just leave the tail hanging, and that creates something of disturbance to waterfowl that would be wanting to roost there.
And that has more of a visual impact than the one fishing pole with the flag?
Well, you're talking about zip ties are fairly thin.
Okay.
I don't think it's something that you would be able to discern at a distance. If anything, the kite might have more of an impact. But I think the concern with the kite is that it could target animals who aren't just roosting on the gear and perhaps affect their behavior in some way.
Okay. And so are you recommending a stipulation related to that?
Yeah, I would recommend, the application includes the lighted buoys. I would recommend, lighted buoys for the corners to aid in nighttime navigation, non-mechanical bird deterrents as requested by DEM. And Madam Chair, I should raise one other issue, and that is the future of the Relinquished site. So it has been communicated to me by the residents that their main objective in reaching this agreement, going through this mediation, was to remove the farm that is closest to their homes, and they have concern that another farm might move in there once the site is vacated. As far as I can tell, and what I've represented to them, is that there is currently no mechanism that would allow us to do that. However, given the history of this site, any subsequent PD review on an application here, or discussion of a potential application, would of course involve the full weight and experience of this story. And any applicant, I think, would be on notice from the very beginning that there could be potential issues with this site, especially with regards to visual impact.
Okay, so we can't require that be a condition that we take the lease area offline, so to speak. However, it's unlikely that another applicant could come in and receive a favorable staff review for that area.
Yes, in my opinion, an application for a similar operation would be challenging to give it a recommendation to move forward.
Okay. Mr. Willis, anything more on that? We're working on, the SAMP and, what are appropriate areas. That's something we would consider in the future as far as mapping out appropriate or inappropriate areas.
And I think, yes, that's absolutely correct, Madam Chair. The base SAMP will be looking at this particular specific issue of aquaculture siting, and the issues that we have learned on this particular shoreline will help us formulate a better aquaculture siting plan, if you will, for the bay.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions for Mr. Getz on his staff report?
Don Gomez.
Mr. Gomez?
Yeah, a couple, but on that last subject, I'd be in favor of a sunset clause on that, on any consideration of replacement of the two existing farm that's going to be removed. And what we might do, if we do have some regs coming downstream, maybe we could just not allow another farm in there until the regs are out, and the regs that are being put in place, as Mr. Willis just described, would be able to consider whether that's a good location or a bad location, I think, and put it in that document. So when we get to the end of this, we may want to reconsider whether we want to put a time frame on even considering another farm in that site. And back to the question I had for Ben was, what's the advantage of the perpendicular lanes over parallel lanes? We run into this. I would assume that the perpendicular lanes allow residents along the shore to move kayaks in and out through the farm. But we look at other farms and we look at parallel lanes that allow people to go along parallel to the shore through the farms with things like canoes and kayaks. Is that perpendicular lanes, the 4 perpendicular lanes, is that really to accommodate the people on shore to come in and out?
Well, I would state that I don't think that was the original intention of them. I think they could lend themselves to be used that way. I think the arrangement of that gear in that fashion, I think, was based on the applicant's experience and knowledge of the bottom type. So he was but the spacing between the rows themselves, the parallel rows, which are running parallel to the shore.
Yes.
I think it would be wide enough for a small paddle craft. And in the distances between the perpendicular lane, likewise, you could get a paddle craft or maybe even a dinghy or Zodiac through that or something like that. But I understand your point. And I would also note that there are no residences on the shoreline in this area, or those who would keep kayaks to launch from there. That does not to say someone might visit that area in a kayak or small vessel.
So the intent is really for the operation of the farm more than anything. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's an added benefit there, though, that it does the organization. I think does allow for that little bit of extra room for someone to get through if they so desired.
Okay, thank you. Nothing further.
Thank you, Mr. Gomez. Anyone else? Mr. I just have a, go ahead.
I just had a question for Ben. I had in my notes, it's the January 13th, 2020 plan. Is that the one that begins on page 16, page 17 of the application package? Excuse me, page 27 of the application package?
January, yeah, it's January 13th, 2021 is the date, and it is the attachment M.
M. All right.
I don't have the page number in front of me.
Okay, so M is marked though January 13th, 2020 dated.
That is the applicant's typo.
Okay.
Unfortunately, but
okay.
Yes.
Right. And it's just to clear, so we don't have the problem we had with the other one. It's 2,000 cages.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And that was very much intentional, and is kind of a point of clarification, I think, on any new application that I would receive. We would want to know the exact number of cages. In addition to that, my colleagues at Army Corps who concurrently review these projects, they need to know those specifics as well. So I am just asking applicants to put in the maximum number they would intend to put on a lease in their plans.
Madam
Thank you.
Chair, just for the council's benefit, the letter submittal Exhibit M begins on council packet, page 25 for council members.
Thank you.
And I would note that the plans within that, that's a cover letter where it begins from the applicant. The actual plans themselves, I believe, have the 2021 date. Let me just verify. Yes, January 2021 on the actual plans.
Thank you. Mr. Longo, I want to get back to this request, I guess, from the neighbors to not allow a future lease in the area that's being vacated. And I see that as a little bit problematic in putting that in some sort of condition in this application that would bind a future applicant. Not to say that I think it would be somewhat foolish for someone to apply for this lease area in the future, given all this discussion and the mediation to move the site. But I don't think legally that we could do that, but tell me if I'm wrong.
No, I think you're right. And I was going to say, one of the big issues is notice, because we didn't notice this applicant or this hearing as we're going to ban aquaculture in this one area. So in the future, if you wanted to, if you're going to zone certain areas allowed, not allowed, everyone would be on notice, they could take part. But I don't think we could do it in this case because we didn't give notice that we might be doing that. But you could put in this one that the staff is directed to bring any applications in this area to the council's attention, because that's just binding on our staff. It's not tying the hands of future councils.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other question? Mr. Willis, you have your microphone off.
I anticipated a question, Madam Chair, but just to reiterate what Mr. Longo said, I think if the council requires staff to bring any application that proposes to use the vacated area to the council, I think that's a reasonable approach to take here.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Getz? Mr. Boyd?
I just wanted to add, Madam Chair, as Mr. Getz indicated, I think certainly he, as well as any future aquaculture coordinator at some point off in the future, would strongly discourage any applicants that might seek an aquaculture lease in that particular location that will be abandoned at some point.
Yes, thank you. That makes sense. All right, I think we've exhausted this and we can invite the applicant to come into the meeting and make any presentation or comments they would like.
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening, Madam Chair.
So Mr. Himmel, I'm sorry, what's your last name?
Upton Himmel.
Upton Himmel. Could you and anybody else who's going to be testifying who's not a lawyer raise your right hand? And do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give tonight will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God?
I do.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Upton Himmel, you heard the discussion just now and the staff report. Is there anything you would like to add to that?
No, I think Ben did an excellent job representing the history of the application. I would just like to add that the initial part, I'd just like to clarify the initial part of back when we initially applied in 2015 in this general vicinity, we were looking for 7 acres to lease, and it was in 2 different parcels, and we ended up with the 2-acre lease at the meeting when we had the hearing in 2015 because of various objections from DEM. And so part of the confusion on our part about the number of cages had to do with that fact. And then subsequent negligence on our part and not working closely with CRMC to find out the number of cages. But I guess my point being that all along our intention was to have around a 7 to 8 acre lease where we could raise around 500,000 oysters. And I specified in the application how we intend to do that. And that's why we've applied for this area that's larger now with more cages. And I understand that can be controversial, but we believe that's what we need for our business to succeed. And our mission is to farm the ocean and restore the environment and distribute the sustainable seafood we raise directly to our community. And we have another farm in Charlestown, and we've been in business for 12 years, and we sell around 500,000 oysters. So we've created a market for that, and 95% of that is in Rhode Island. So we feel that this site would contain all of our future needs. We don't intend to put out 2,000 cages in the near future, but once we did all the math and, in our experience, this is what we need to stay in business and continue to be a Rhode Island company. And we're very, proud to be part of our community and have this opportunity. We know it's not a right, but it's a privilege, and we're grateful for you reviewing our application.
Thank you. And I commend you, and I'll commend the Westwind neighbors for entering into a mediation process. I haven't heard of that before as extended to an aquaculture farmer. I haven't heard of that offering at all for any farmer. So it was interesting to read about and could serve as a model for future contested aquaculture applications. I really appreciate yours and the other parties' efforts to get together and flesh out the issues short of a Zoom hearing before us, because that you're going to get a much better result that way. So I was very happy to see that. I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of all my council members that we appreciate those efforts before coming to the council.
Thank you. Yeah, I found it to be a really enlightening experience. And I mean, this whole process in the last 5 years has been very stressful, and the mediation was definitely a change. And I understood their concerns and empathized with them. And, we went from a very tense, stressful situation that none of us were enjoying to, not necessarily agreeing about everything, but definitely at least seeing eye to eye. So I found it to be extremely rewarding in of itself.
Great. You heard the question earlier about the why 2 years. Can you address that?
Yeah, so I believe that when I initially was speaking with now Director Willis and Dave Butel, when we negotiated the removal process, I think that number was just put out there as enough time to move everything. It took us about a year to set up the lease, and that was before we had to operate the lease. So from my perspective, we're operating a business in 2 places with a set number of staff and a set budget. And as you know, times are very difficult, furthermore now because of COVID. And so we can't really drop everything to move the farm. We have to, without hiring more staff. So the longer we have, the easier it'll be for us to do it in phases. But I would be happy with 18 months. Really, it's this spring and next spring would be the crucial times, because we can't really do it when we're in full swing in the summer. And, maybe in the fall, but it depends. We're pretty busy winterizing the farms now. So if we had 2 springs to do it, that would work very well. And our intention currently, if this was to be approved, would be to first move the 180 cages that are over the 240 limit, that most of which are now sitting on land, to the new site, and then slowly move the others as we have time. And I would hope to do it in one season if possible. It would be easier operationally for us to be in one place. There's no advantage to us being spread out. It's just a question of time and money.
Okay, and then thank you for addressing that. And then as far as the lighted buoys and the non-mechanical waterfowl deterrents, you agree with those?
Yes, that's no problem.
Any other questions council members have for Mr. Upton Himmel? Okay, I think then I will invite others to speak, as I'm sure they want to, on this application, and we'll come back to you, Mr. Upton Himmel. Anyone in the public, the objectors, West Wind neighbors who would like to speak for or against this application, if you can please raise your hand and you will be put into the meeting to speak.
Madam Chair, could I?
Oh, Mr. Getz?
Yeah, we have Anna Gerber-Williams from DEM on the line. I know she may have some limited time tonight. I don't know if it'd be appropriate to hear from her before we hear from the public.
Absolutely. I'm just, does she have her hand raised?
What was the name again?
Anna Gerber-Williams.
I've got it.
I see her and her hands raised. Yeah.
Hi, Madam Chair.
Hi, how are you? Good evening.
Good, thank you.
Were your ears burning? You were talking about you. So I guess we want to know, there was some discussion on this January 13, 2021 revised version configuration. And I think it was represented that you liked it better and that you're maybe going to get a letter together, but it happened too quickly. Are you able to speak to that tonight?
Yes, I can. So I will be submitting a letter to Ben, and he should be expecting that in the near future. But I would like to say that in the past, Jules has been very good about reaching out and working with DEM on choosing his site selection. And he sent me an email about a month ago letting me know about this change in his site layout. And I would like to say that DEM is pleased to see that he's going to be moving his site further out of the area that overlaps with historical eelgrass in that area. So I'd like to have that on the record, that DEM is in support of this change that he's making to his site layout.
Thank you. Is there anything else you wanted to address?
That's all we have from the Division of Marine Fisheries at DEM.
Okay. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, any other council members want to ask Ms. Gerber-Williams anything before she leaves us? Okay, all right, thanks. All right, if there are others who would like to speak, could you please raise your hand and you'll be admitted into the meeting by Mr. Moore. I see Mr. Sherman. Hi, Mr. Sherman.
How are you?
Good.
Ben spoke earlier how Jules and I were unable to come to an agreement just as the amount of cages that will be in the lease. And I think that's one of our main points. I'm the farm manager at Watson Farm, which is the abutting property where this lease would be. And one of our main concerns is the density that it would be going from, you know, the amount of cages per acre. And we are trying to preserve the historic district and the windmill district of Watson Farm and Jamestown itself. And even in the town plan, it comes to one of the goals is to preserve and protect the unique, fragile, and scenic coastline and protect accessibility to the shoreline. And Ben had stated about, you know, a kayak being placed there. Well, that is where we put our kayaks in. You know, that's our access point of the area, you know, to use and recreate on the property that we have here. So if it's extremely dense with that amount of cages, it is a concern for us. And, you know, Jules did make a revision to the plan, which we did appreciate, to slide that backwards away from our access slightly. It became slightly closer to shore, which I understand was he needed to have that acreage, but you know, the two acres with the amount of cages he has now was roughly 120 cages per acre. And this would bring it up to roughly 256 cages per acre, which I think is, you know, drastically more dense. And it's just for us, it's already a very dense area. And I understand our house isn't on it, but it is property that we use and the public uses, and we share that with public. You know, being a part of historic New England, people come here and walk our shoreline, and our boundaries have been the same here since the 1600s. So it's important for us to preserve the historic landscape of Rhode Island and Jamestown itself. And like I said, we recreate there. That's our beach that we use as a family, and my friends and family come there, and it's important to us to keep that, you know, undisturbed. And I understand Jules has to have a business and run that business, and I appreciate that. And I am pro aquaculture, being a farmer myself. As I said, the only area we weren't able to come to an agreement on is the amount of cages that he had in his application. I feel strongly that 2,000 is just too many. So that's what I have to say on it.
Thank you, Mr. Sherman. Any questions council members have for Mr. Sherman? All right, thank you for your comments.
Of course.
Anyone else who would like to speak? Can you please raise your hand and you'll be admitted to the meeting? I don't see any hands. Mr. Moore?
I don't, oh, we do have one.
Okay, there. Renee McCooey, looks like.
What happened?
We can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yes, we can't
Okay.
see you, but we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong. This
That's
is
okay.
Renee. This is Renee McCooey. I am part of the neighborhood of Westwind Drive. We have met with, I call him Mr. Jules, during mediations, and we've had very good discussions. But I just want to tell I'm a little nervous, I'm sorry. The CRMC has to understand that if all that has been applied for out there is approved, there will be over 17,000 visual floats in our beautiful historic Dutch harbor. And that doesn't include the existing floats that are already there. And, you know, questions on the application are, will it impact, you know, access? Will it impact visual needs? what's happening to this beautiful Dutch harbor is obscene. It really is. And you know what? We are not against agriculture. I would love to have our foods fresh and here, but there comes a point where I would like the CRMC to consider what they're doing to the visual impact with these oyster farms. And you know, this would never have happened. We would have never gotten to this point if there were just low impact, you know, floats. There are farms out here that are beautiful. I mean, I'm one of those kayakers, and they're beautiful, well maintained. But then in my heart, I think 2,000 floats, which would, no, 2,000 cages, which would be 4,000 floats, is just very sad to me. So I just want you to keep that in mind, that there would be over 17,000 floats out there. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McCooey. Were you a part of the mediation?
I was.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I see an Alan who has his hand up.
Who is that?
I don't know what I'm doing here.
Hello, can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, this is Alan Katz. I live on West Wind Drive. I agree with what Renee said. What's happened to Dutch Harbor is really, in the last 3 or 4 years, is just very sad. It really is. We used to have one of the nicest pieces of ocean and harbor to view and to use recreationally, and it's a commercial, it's just turned into a commercial aquaculture farm now. And the 2,000 cages, we, you know, quite frankly, never was really happy with that. But the main thing I want to talk about is the 2 years. You know, I think when we agreed on this thing in mediation, I think in our minds, we felt that, you know, it was just going to be moved, you know, like in one summer, picked up and moved. And, you know, we agreed to this, to the number of cages only in order to get the current farm moved from where it is now as soon as possible. And 2 years is just really sticks in our craw because it's just too long. You know, I don't know how to run an aquaculture farm or whatever, but, you know, it just seems like it's something that should be able to be done within 6 months to a year. And that would help us feel that the agreement we made was, you know, worthwhile to move the cages out further from our houses. So that's basically what I have to say.
Mr. Katz, was the time period of the vacating of the 2 existing lease, was that discussed as part of the mediation?
Quite frankly, I don't recall.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
No, that pretty much
Thank you
covers it.
for your comments.
No problem.
Would anyone else like to speak on this application? I see a Jay Hainsworth. Jay Hainsworth, we can see your screen. We can't see you and you're on mute.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and council members. My name is Jamie Hainsworth. I'm the town administrator in Jamestown. And I have been fortunate enough to speak to many of these residents over the past year in my capacity. And I won't repeat what they said tonight, but they all have valid concerns. They're very concerned about how big this field will be. I believe you'll remember that I sent you a letter sometime this year at the town council's direction. And they have a concern as well as when is enough enough? When do you have a master plan? Will you form a master plan? I heard Ben talk about that tonight, and that's great. I'm hoping that you really do that. And again, in the last week or so, since this application came to light again, I've heard from several residents that are really concerned with the going from 240 cages to 2,000 cages. As you can appreciate, that's a big shock to them, or a great concern that they have, that you're going from 240 cages to 2,000 cages, and that you're going to disturb their tranquility, their vision, and their use of recreational facilities along the seashore. And many of these people, as you heard from Renee and a couple other people, that they do appreciate and they do support aquaculture, but they also believe that it should be controlled, and there should be some type of mix so that they can enjoy their lives as well. And I thank you all for your attention, and I hope that you take the town council's suggestion or their question of when is enough enough, and do we have a site plan, and do we have a vision for the future? I think planning is very important, as it is in everything else that a town does and a municipality does, and that the state should do as well. So I thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions for me, I'll be glad to answer.
Any questions for the town administrator? And thank you, Mr. Hainsworth. We do, struggle with these applications, and the same comments come up about master plan and, overall vision for aquaculture in the state. And I understand that, and that's a valid comment, and it's something that we need to do. That's part of our evolving special area management plan. Every time someone like you and others speak on it, it emphasizes the speed at which we should be working on it. So we will work on it. It's important. And I agree with you. I want to have it as a chair. I'd like to have that special area management plan. There's a lot of pieces to that particular SAMP. That's one of them. But we can advance some along earlier than others, like we were doing with the cables that we were talking about earlier.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would offer that myself, my staff, we have a great town planner, and we have some great residents that have a lot to add. We would be more than willing to participate in anything that you would need from us to make a plan such as that. And I'm sure there are other communities just like us that you hear from when I don't listen to your nightly meetings. I'm sorry, they're interesting, but I don't have time to listen to everyone. And I'm sure there are other communities that would love to interject into these conversations and add some good constructive ways of commingling aquaculture with recreational and residents that live on the shore. And again, I thank you all very much, and I appreciate the hard work you do.
Thank you. Be careful what you ask for. We might be following up with you quickly.
No, it's my planner that's going to be very upset with me in the morning. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks. Okay, anyone else who would like to speak on this application? I don't see any other hands. Mr. Moore?
I don't see any hands either.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to put it back to you, Mr. Upton Himmel, if you would like to respond to anything that was said by the residents and the town administrator. You don't have to. You have an opportunity to address it.
Yeah, I don't have any specific response, just that I'm sympathetic to their concerns, and I understand It seems like many of the issues are larger and have to do with planning for aquaculture, which I agree would be helpful, and it would be helpful for me and other applicants as well, because it's been quite a process to try to negotiate with all the interested parties and balance all the needs and run a business. And I've been trying to do the best I can, but if there was more of a clear-cut guidance, I think that it would probably behoove the industry growth as well as its relations with the community, because we want to be part of the community and we don't like having conflict and feeling unwanted. So I hear what people are saying, but I don't have any specific answers.
And would you be willing, like the town administrator, to participate in future planning input into that type of effort?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, and I know there's others who are, represent our industry that would also be willing to.
Okay. Two things that came up, the number of cages, those were specifically discussed during the mediation, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that was, when Alan said he doesn't recall, it wasn't something that was, I'm sorry, the number of cages, yes.
Yeah.
Not the timeline. The
Yeah.
timeline was in the document that I shared, but it's not something we really discussed. As I mentioned, my recollection is that it's something I discussed with CRMC and then put in the application, which the mediation then reviewed. But the number of cages, yes, that was clear from the beginning. The idea was that if I move, I would like to expand because I'd always wanted to expand.
Okay, that was the consideration for moving.
Correct.
Okay. And then to Mr. Katz's point about the how long, I know you addressed it up front. You said you could live with 18 months. Is that the biggest stretch you can, or the shortest that you can do it in?
I mean, that's what I would be comfortable with. I think I hope that we can do it more quickly, but I hate to put ourselves in a bind because every year something happens, all your seed dies or there's a storm. And if we have this looming huge project in addition to everything else, it doesn't give us much wiggle room. I would like to do it as quickly as possible.
Okay.
And I understand, like he said, we didn't really discuss that, and that was probably an oversight. It's something that should have been more thoroughly hashed out.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for the applicant before we close the public hearing? Okay, hearing none, we'll close the public hearing. Mr. Getz, I just wanted to ask you about the 2,000 cages that you reviewed that against all the criteria for legal standards for this application and found that it was appropriate?
Yes, it meets the requirements of the Red Book in that regard, yes.
Okay. And I'm wondering, this is sort of out loud, maybe Mr. Willis, you could help me with this, but is there something we could do to put a bookend on the how long to vacate that would also give some flexibility to the applicant? So we would say, I'm just throwing this out here, by the end of this year or 1 year, you give a time frame. But for good cause, it can be extended an additional 6 months or something to that effect.
I think you nailed it, Madam Chair. I think what also Mr. Upton Himmel would mention that he was looking seasonality issues, maybe accomplishing the move of all the cages over 2 seasons, given the fact that he has a growing season to also operate his business. So if an end of this calendar year would be a deadline with a proviso to extend that into the next season so that he can finish the work, I think that would be appropriate too.
Okay. All right, any further discussion on this? Before I would ask for a motion. Okay, hearing none, I'll ask for a motion. Any council member want to move this application? Mr. Gagnon? You're on mute.
Yep. Okay. Yep. Thanks, Madam Chair. So I would like to move approval of the application with the conditions that we've discussed, including the non-mechanical bird deterrent, lighted buoys, and the completing the removal out of the 2-acre lease within 1 year with a 1-season extension if the executive director deems that's appropriate.
So you would be vesting the discretion with the executive director if at the end of the year, the applicant needed additional time?
Yes.
Okay, and that would work, Mr. Willis?
Yes.
Okay. And then this would be based on the revised plan of January 13th, 2021, which starts on page 25 of our application packet, correct?
Correct.
And could you or the chair just nail down what the executive director, how long can he extend it? I think there was talk over the season, but is there
1 season or 6 months? Is that what we discussed?
Yeah, and I would recommend
Yes.
6 months, Madam Chair. It's essentially, here we are, beginning of February, so it would be no more than 18 months maximum.
Yes. All right. I'm good with that. 18 months.
Is that clear, Mr. Longo?
Yeah, just so his discretion is to approve it if the applicant's made a good faith effort to begin it and has justified that some extenuating circumstances necessitates him needing another 6 months.
That works for me, Mr. Longo. I would work hand in hand with Mr. Getz and the applicant to make sure that progress is being made before we make any decision on extending it in another 6 months.
So that's your motion, Mr. Gagnon?
Yes, it is.
Thank you, Mr. Gagnon. Is there a second?
Tricia Reynolds, second.
Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. Any further discussion on the pending motion? If not, I'll do a roll call. Vice Chair Ray Koya,
Ray Coy votes aye.
Patricia Reynolds,
Reynolds votes aye.
Ron Gagnon,
Ron Gagnon, aye.
Joy Montanaro,
Joy Montanaro votes aye.
Don Gomez,
Don Gomez, aye.
and myself, Jennifer Cervenka, aye. The motion carries. And the application with the stipulations previously articulated on the revised plan is approved. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Thank you, Mr. Upton Himmel.
Thank you so much.
And that takes us, I believe, to the end of our agenda. So I will have a motion from Don Gomez to adjourn.
We had a little bit of unfinished business, I think. We had talked about the Coastal Resources Director bringing to the council's attention. This is relative to the docs that we did tonight, which
Okay.
were reasonably similar among the three of them. And it was suggested that the director bring to the council's attention of any application for a farm using a vacated farm site. And I'm not sure exactly how we want to word that, but we should probably get a vote on it, get it into the minutes tonight, and maybe work on a change to the policy section of the Red Book under aquaculture that would address that desire. And going along with that, over the years, the council has historically, when we can give up some of our administrative discussions and allow the staff to sign off on certain pieces of certain applications that come in, we may want to in the future reconsider some increased authority to sign the types of documents that we saw tonight, which had no objections, were very minor, and were designed to fit in context with the surrounding. So kind of two thoughts there. One is getting something started to get a little, so the council can be notified. As I look through the aquaculture part of the, one of my favorite sections of the Red Book, it seems that the director has quite a bit of authority to allow renewals on leases and things like that. So I think that would be a good thing, that the council should know when a vacated spot will become vacated again, which may get through as it sits without the council knowing. So, and again, it'll take some kind of a legal wording to bring that about, I think, beyond my scope.
Yeah, and that all makes sense to me. For purposes of just this meeting, I don't know if falls within what's been noticed.
No. So we bring it to the next meeting, or bring it to a
Yes.
future meeting.
Yeah, and policy and planning, certainly.
Yeah, and exactly. And so if we just put something to that effect in the minutes, it'll keep us aware of what we wanted to do here.
Good. We'll be reminded when we review for the next meeting, so that's smart.
Well, and my last comment is, I was watching Netflix instead of logging in, and my wife kept saying, "Don't you have a meeting? Don't you have a meeting?" And I said, "No," because I was watching whatever the show was. I forgot already.
Are you watching The Crown again?
Oh, well, yeah. So now she's got a gotcha on me, and I'm in big trouble for a few days. Yeah. So
You can get sucked into Netflix, and there's no world outside of your iPad or phone.
I even sit in my chair and watch Netflix while I'm eating supper sometimes. So it's bad. I've got my dog with me though. So anyway, that's good. So I will move that we adjourn, I guess. That's what everybody wants to do.
Yeah, because we want to go watch Netflix. No. All right, Mr. Willis, did you have something further?
No, I was just going to poke fun at Don, saying that both Lisa and I now have him on speed dial just before all these meetings. Please tell your wife.
I don't know. It's a function of age. I was
That's
still
right.
boiling. I was still boiling inside about the hearing we had the other night with the Senate subcommittee, and I was very lucky because Ray and Jen managed to bail me out when my words started coming out different than my brain was saying things that I wanted to say. So it was an interesting meeting, but the three of us made it through it anyway.
Yeah, it's no problem. And if you don't show up, we know where to find you.
Lisa's been pretty good at it.
Yeah, no problem. All right, well, is there anything more on this before we have a second on the motion to adjourn? Okay.
Ray Koya seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Koya. I'm
You're
just,
welcome.
all those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Have a nice night, everybody.
You too. Be safe, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.